Have you ever felt that something simple, ordinary, everyday, suddenly turned into an obstacle impossible to cross? Imagine someone trained to enter hostile territories, to advance under pressure, to cross real frontiers where life hung by a thread. Now imagine that same person standing frozen before an ordinary door, the kind found in any house, unable to move forward, not from lack of strength, not from conscious fear, but from something invisible, silent, and far too deep to be immediately explained. What you're about to discover might surprise you. This story begins like this: a soldier returning from war. He survived what many did not. He witnessed scenes that never leave memory, heard sounds that still echo in the silence of night. Like so many soldiers returning from combat, he believed the hardest part was behind him. The war was over, his body came back whole, his uniform was hung up. But civilian life began revealing something strange: closed doors. Just that, nothing supernatural at first glance. Wooden doors, metal doors, ordinary doors in ordinary houses. But every time he approached one, something happened. His body froze. His breathing changed. His feet wouldn't obey. It was as if an invisible barrier rose right there. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt something blocking your path without a logical explanation? To outsiders, it seemed like an exaggeration. After all, he crossed minefields, moved through conflict zones, survived the chaos of war. How could a simple door cause such a reaction? And that's exactly where this story starts becoming unsettling. Because this isn't about physical strength. It isn't about courage. It's about something many soldiers who return from war carry. Wounds that don't appear on medical exams, but manifest as signs. Spiritual signs don't always appear clearly. Sometimes they hide in details so simple they seem almost ridiculous: a hallway, a sound, a smell, a closed door. And the more the soldier tried to ignore it, the more the blockage repeated itself, as if life were insisting on showing him something he still refused to see. Stay with me until the end of this story, because every detail matters. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself it was just fatigue, readjustment, accumulated stress. Many soldiers returning from combat go through this, right? But deep down, something didn't fit. The feeling didn't come just from his mind. It came from a deeper place where words rarely reach, a place where extreme experiences leave silent traces. And maybe the most disturbing part wasn't the door itself, but what it represented. Because every time he stopped there, it was as if time slowed down. Memories surfaced without warning. Emotions he'd sworn were buried suddenly emerged. It was as if that door guarded something on the other side, not a room, but a truth. How many people today live something similar? How many soldiers, how many men and women who return from war face invisible battles? Inside their own homes, how many closed doors appear as disguised spiritual signs, masquerading as ordinary obstacles? Perhaps this isn't just the story of one soldier. Maybe it's a mirror of something you're also experiencing in another form, another context. Because not all wars happen on the battlefield. Some continue afterward in silence, in details, in doors that seem unwilling to open. And it's precisely when he decides to stop fighting this blockage that something begins to shift. But that part of the story still needs to be told with care, because the meaning behind these doors goes far beyond what he imagined. And while the story begins touching silent places, something important is happening right now, not just with this soldier, but with everyone listening. Because when stories like this are told, they stop being individual and become part of an invisible community made of people carrying similar signs. Even while living different realities, maybe as you listen, a memory surfaced. Maybe it's not a door but another kind of blockage, a recurring situation, a limit that always appears at the same point in life. If this resonates with you, leave a comment below with what moved you most so far. Sometimes, writing just one simple sentence is the first step toward understanding something long held in silence. And when you share it, others realize they aren't alone on this journey. This exchange matters more than it seems. Every comment is a signal that this message needs to keep circulating, reaching those who still can't name what they feel. Your participation here is what helps this channel grow and bring stories like this to more people who have also returned from invisible wars, trying to find themselves again amid ordinary life. If at any point in this account your heart tightened, or you felt that hard-to-explain sensation, liking the video is a simple but powerful way to say, "This needs to be heard." That gesture helps keep alive a space where deep, moving, and transformative stories continue to be shared with respect and sensitivity. And if you feel this kind of content speaks to something within you, subscribing to the channel is an invitation to walk together. Here, every story is chosen to provoke reflection, create connection, and reveal meanings often overlooked in daily life. By subscribing, you show you want to keep following accounts that go beyond the surface and speak directly to the soul, because this story isn't over yet. The soldier hasn't crossed all his doors, and the meaning behind these spiritual signs only begins to reveal itself when someone decides to stop, listen, and move forward with greater awareness. And it's right from here that everything starts gaining new meaning. Before any combat, before any boundary crossed, the soldier already carried a story that explained much of the man he became. He wasn't driven by impulse. He lived by discipline, routine, a structured mindset, waking early, keeping schedules, respecting hierarchies, following rules with almost mathematical precision. From a young age, he learned that limits don't exist for those willing to cross them with preparation and focus. Barriers were challenges. Obstacles were merely tests of endurance. In civilian life, he functioned like a well-tuned clock. Work was orderly, decisions firm, doubts few. Not because he didn't feel fear, but because he'd learned early not to let it control him. Those who knew him before the war often described him as reliable, solid, the kind of person who holds everything together when everything else is falling apart. A man of action, not hesitation. And that didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built through years of difficult choices, silent sacrifices, and a posture that always prioritized duty over comfort. When he chose a military career, it wasn't escape or impulse, it was coherence. War, at that moment, seemed like a natural extension of who he already was. Intense training, physical tests, psychological pressure, none of it intimidated him. On the contrary, there was a strange sense of belonging, as if that extreme environment revealed an even more functional version of himself. Every challenge overcome reinforced an inner truth. He knew how to cross limits. On the training ground, doors were never a problem. Walls were scaled. Unknown terrain was advanced upon. Difficult orders were carried out. His mind was trained to act under stress, make quick decisions, maintain control even when everything around seemed unstable. This ability shaped not just the soldier, but the man. It created an identity based on efficiency, courage, and the belief that there's always a way forward, you just have to keep going. During the war, this intensified. There was no room for long pauses or deep questioning. Survival demanded total focus on the present. Each day was a sequence of decisions that couldn't afford mistakes, and he did what needed to be done. He advanced when necessary, retreated when strategic, protected his comrades, completed missions, survived. Too many, that alone would be reason enough to consider him unshakable. But there's one detail almost no one notices at that moment. Surviving isn't the same as processing. Keeping in motion doesn't mean understanding everything you've lived through. And the soldier, faithful to his own mindset, believed it was enough to just keep going, return, resume life, adjust routine, as if everything could be reorganized with the same discipline that had always worked before. The hidden truth is that the strength, which had sustained him so well, also taught him to push feelings into a distant corner. Unresolved emotions stayed backstage in his own mind. Doubts were silenced. Deep impacts were filed away under the label duty fulfilled. He didn't see this as denial, but as maturity. After all, it had always worked, and it did, until it stopped working. Because when someone builds their entire identity on crossing limits, the day something blocks their path becomes more than just an annoyance, it becomes a silent threat to their very sense of self. That's why understanding who he was before the war is so crucial to grasping the shock that came afterward. The transformation doesn't begin with the blockage. It begins with the contrast. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a subtle difference between strength and rigidity, between courage and emotional avoidance, between moving forward and ignoring. And that difference only reveals itself when life presents something that can't be overcome through physical readiness, strategy, or obedience to external rules. The soldier wasn't afraid of closed doors before the war because doors always meant passage, continuity, progress, never symbols, never messages, just structures to be opened or crossed. So when something so simple started causing internal resistance, his control-trained mind entered conflict. It made no sense. It didn't align with who he'd always been. And precisely because of that, the impact was so profound. This journey isn't just about one man or a military past. It's about identity, about the choices that shape who we believe we are, and how we deal with what doesn't fit the logic that always worked before. It's about silent transformation, about revelations that don't arrive as ready-made answers, but as persistent discomforts. And the deeper the story goes, the clearer it becomes that nothing he experienced before was in vain. Everything built the ground for what needed to be seen. If this part of the story touched something inside you, comment below. This makes sense to me. His return began as everyone imagined it should. The tight embrace of family, relief etched on faces, the feeling that the danger was finally behind him. The house was in the same place. The furniture seemed smaller than in memory. The smells were too familiar to feel strange. On the outside, everything pointed to normalcy. Inside, something was still trying to reorganize. He believed time would be enough. Returning to routine would be enough. Keeping his mind busy and moving forward would be enough. In the first days, he tried hard to fit every detail into what he used to call ordinary life. He woke early, even when unnecessary, kept rigid habits, walked through the house as if following an invisible protocol. His mind sought stability in simple decisions: what to eat, where to sit, how to fill the silence. It was an honest attempt at reconstruction, a silent journey of adaptation that no one around could fully see. It was in this seemingly safe setting that the strangeness began to emerge, not as a shock, but as a discreet, almost negligible sensation. A slight pause before entering a room, an odd discomfort when approaching a closed door. Nothing dramatic at first, just a delay. One extra second standing still, as if his body needed confirmation for a gesture that had always been automatic. He didn't mention it to anyone. It didn't seem important. After all, compared to everything he'd been through, this felt irrelevant. But repetition turns details into messages. Every time a closed door appeared before him, something activated inside. His heart raced without clear reason. His breath grew short. His hands lost their steadiness for an instant. A physical and emotional blockage that clashed with his own story. His trained mind tried to take control. He looked for rational explanations. Accumulated fatigue, adjustment to civilian life, echoes of a war-shaped mentality. Nothing seemed sufficient. The impact wasn't in his thoughts, it was in his body. And when the body reacts before reason, something deeper is asking for attention. Yet he kept pushing forward. He opened the door. He entered, pretending to himself that nothing had happened. But the discomfort didn't disappear. On the contrary, it grew in the backrooms of consciousness. Each new closed door intensified the sensation, as if the simple act of crossing that threshold triggered memories he hadn't chosen to revisit. Distant sounds, fragmented images, nameless emotions. It wasn't fear in the common sense. It was a weight, an internal resistance that wouldn't obey orders. His family noticed small changes, but couldn't interpret them. A more distant gaze, a longer hesitation moving through the house, silences stretching beyond the usual. He remained functional, polite, present, but something had already shifted in his inner dynamics. The house, which should have represented safety, began becoming a mirror of unresolved conflicts, and the doors, without warning, took center stage in this experience. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because it's exactly here that many transformation journeys begin, without the person even realizing it. When what should be simple becomes difficult, when old mindsets no longer offer sufficient answers, when automatic decisions now demand awareness. The soldier wasn't just returning from war. He was being confronted by a hidden truth about himself. Each closed door brought a silent choice: force your way through or listen to your body. Ignore the signal or try to understand it. He chose to force it, as he always had. and he always managed to cross. But the emotional cost grew. Something was left behind each time. A sense of exhaustion that didn't come from physical effort, but from internal resistance. The war had ended, but its impact kept echoing in unexpected ways. It's curious how life uses simple symbols to communicate deep revelations. Doors represent passage, transition, change. And maybe, in that moment, what he lacked most wasn't courage to move on but permission to pause. The house wasn't just a place to rest. It became a space of observation, a place where internal decisions needed reevaluation, where an identity built over years began being quietly but persistently questioned. He started noticing the blockage didn't happen in just any situation. It arose when he was alone, when no one was watching, when he didn't need to prove strength or control. It was there, in the simplest moments. That resistance became clearest as if something within him was saying parts of the journey hadn't yet been consciously crossed. This awareness didn't bring immediate answers. It brought more questions, and questions have transformative power when not suppressed. The soldier began suspecting those doors weren't about the present but about old decisions, postponed emotions, truths tucked away while survival demanded absolute focus on the now. Returning home created space for everything that had no room during war. None of this happened dramatically or mystically. The experience was silent, intimate, nearly invisible to outsiders. But inside, something was being reorganized. A mindset built to cross external limits now needed to learn to respect internal ones. And that change doesn't happen without resistance, without discomfort, without impact. The soldier still didn't fully understand what was happening. He only felt something asking for attention. And for the first time, he considered the possibility that crossing isn't always the answer. Sometimes, staying before the door in silence can reveal more than forcing passage. This thought formed slowly, making room for new revelations yet to come. If this part of the journey resonates with something you've experienced or are experiencing, comment below. I'm on this journey too, when the unease became impossible to ignore. His first reaction was to seek answers where one usually looks when something escapes control: logic. It was the most familiar, safest, most acceptable path. If there was a blockage, there had to be a clear, measurable cause, something that could be identified, categorized, and treated. He scheduled consultations, answered questionnaires, went through detailed evaluations. Attentive doctors, experienced professionals, all trying to fit his experience into known diagnoses. Post-return stress, some said. Accumulated fatigue, others affirmed. Trauma, a word that felt too big for what he felt, was nonetheless repeated often. The explanations made sense on paper. Each term came with graphs, statistics, protocols. His rational mind clung to this like someone finding a map in unknown territory. If it had a name, then there was a solution. But something still didn't quite add up. The exams showed nothing out of the ordinary. His body was healthy, strong, functional. No injuries, no neurological failures, no clear signs of physical impairment. The refrain was always similar: this will pass with time. It's just an adjustment phase. Be patient with yourself. He nodded, accepted the advice. After all, he'd always trusted structures, systems, technical answers. Yet the doors remained. And so did the blockage. It was strange to realize that, even while understanding all the explanations, his body reacted the same way as if it hadn't received the official memo that everything was under control. Every time he tried to cross a closed door, something slipped beyond reason's grasp. It wasn't explicit panic. It wasn't physical pain. It was a diffuse, deep, immeasurable feeling, a hidden truth that didn't fit into diagnoses. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a crucial point where logic stops reaching certain human experiences. Not everything that impacts us can be sorted into clinical categories. Some answers don't come from outside, they come from inner layers long silenced. And that's exactly where many transformative processes begin to unfold. He started realizing that by over-explaining, something was being left out. Consultations ended, recommendations were followed, yet the discomfort lingered backstage. It was as if his mind were trying to protect its own structure, avoiding something more sensitive. His problem-solving mind sought quick fixes, but what was happening didn't ask for speed. It asked for listening. there was also a certain relief in accepting external explanations. They brought the feeling that nothing internal needed revisiting. If it was just stress, rest would help. If it was just fatigue, better sleep would fix it. If it was trauma, treatment would resolve it. All this kept intact the identity he'd built over a lifetime: strong, functional, prepared, in control. But the real impact of this experience didn't seem interested in preserving that image. The more he tried to fit what he felt into boxes, the clearer it became the problem wasn't just in his body. Something reacted before thought, before conscious decision. A memory without clear images, an emotion without a name, an inner alert that didn't follow rational rules, and that created a silent conflict between what he knew and what he felt. This conflict is common in many human journeys, though rarely spoken of openly. The attempt to explain everything to avoid feeling, the search for outside answers to avoid inner encounters. And when that happens, signs start appearing in unexpected ways, small, repetitive, persistent, as if life insisted on pointing to something ignored too long. To outsiders, doors remain just doors. To him, they began carrying a symbolic weight hard to ignore. They always appeared at moments of transition, moving from one room to another, switching tasks, going from silence to interaction. That's where his body reacted, as if each door were an unwelcome invitation to cross something internal not yet ready to be faced the old way. No doctor mentioned this. No diagnosis included this dimension, because it wasn't a malfunction, it was a message. And messages demand interpretation, not just correction. This awareness began emerging slowly, almost like a whisper. Not a final conclusion, but a new doubt. And doubts, when welcomed, open space for revelations. He started to understand he might be trying to heal something not yet understood. That maybe the blockage wasn't a system error but a necessary pause, a strategic interruption in a journey always marked by constant advancement. For the first time, the possibility of not having immediate answers stopped feeling threatening and started feeling curious. That curiosity changed the inner tone of the experience. Instead of just fighting the symptom, a desire emerged to understand its meaning. Instead of forcing his body to obey, a silent question rose. What is this trying to show me? And when that question appears, something begins reorganizing inside even without a clear answer yet. The soldier didn't abandon reason. He just realized it wasn't enough alone. Deeper layers were asking for attention. Old decisions needed revisiting. Emotions suspended in time. Impacts that couldn't be processed while survival was priority. All this began moving in the backrooms of consciousness. Nothing changed abruptly. The doors were still there. The blockage still appeared. But now there was a new perspective on his own experience, less combative, more investigative. And it's in that space between rational explanation and inner listening that the journey begins taking a new direction, opening paths to understandings beyond the visible. If this part of the story echoes something you felt, comment below. This makes sense to me. At first, he believed ignoring it would be enough. After all, that had always worked. When something bothered him, the answer was to move forward, not give it space, not feed it, keep his mind busy. And that's exactly what he tried to do. Every time he felt that silent resistance before a closed door, he'd take a deep breath, square his shoulders, turn the doorknob, and cross, proving to himself he was still in control. But life has a curious way of repeating what isn't heard. The sign returned, and returned again. Not aggressively, not blatantly. It came with the same unsettling subtlety as always, a minimal delay in movement, a hard-to-explain tightness in the chest, a sense that something was out of place even when everything seemed exactly as it should be. The more he tried to treat it as irrelevant, the more present the phenomenon became, as if repetition were the chosen language. To transmit a message still not understood, doors began losing their neutral character. They stopped being just functional objects and started carrying unexpected symbolic weight. Not consciously at first, but his body reacted before his mind. Each closed door seemed to mark a transition, a before and after, a boundary between spaces, between internal states, between what was visible and what remained hidden in the backrooms of his own story. Disquiet settled in fully when he realized the discomfort wasn't decreasing with time. On the contrary, it intensified. His heart raced more easily. His breath grew shorter. His mind, accustomed to quick decisions, began to feel confused. A growing conflict between the desire to advance and the sense that something asked for pause. This inner tension didn't shout, but it also didn't stay silent. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because here is where many transformation journeys gain momentum. When repetition stops being coincidence and starts resembling an invitation. When an old mindset clashes with a reality demanding a different posture. The soldier began realizing it wasn't about overcoming the blockage, but understanding what it represented. Every attempt to ignore it increased the emotional impact. The unease followed him all day, even when he wasn't facing a door. It became an inner state, a silent expectation that something would happen. And that constant anticipation wore him down, not physically, but inwardly. It was like carrying an always-on alert without knowing exactly what was being signaled. He began noticing patterns. The blockage was stronger at certain times, when he was alone, when silence stretched, when old thoughts surfaced without warning. In those moments, doors seemed to amplify everything that had been stored. Emotions with no space during war began pressing on his awareness, not as clear memories, but as diffuse sensations hard to put into words. The discomfort stopped being just a symptom and became a constant presence. This created contradictory inner decisions. Part of him wanted to regain control, reinforce discipline, assert his will. Another part, still timid, began questioning if insistence was really the path. This internal division increased tension, creating a silent battlefield inside someone who already knew too many battles. The repeated signal didn't bring ready answers. It brought questions, and questions demand emotional availability, willingness to look beyond the obvious. Doors, now clearly symbolic, seemed to say something bigger was at stake, something that couldn't be resolved with force, rational explanations, or just the passage of time. The soldier started feeling this experience touched a hidden truth about his own journey. Not just about war, but about who he became to survive it. About decisions made on autopilot. About feelings sidelined in the name of efficiency. About an identity built to function under pressure but perhaps needing review outside of it. The disquiet grew because the signal didn't ask for haste. It asked for presence, and that was uncomfortable for someone used to acting, not feeling. The emotional escalation didn't come from external events, but from accumulated internal resistance. Each ignored door added another layer of tension. Each forced crossing left an emotional residue hard to dissipate. The observer, following this repetition, begins to see this isn't just a soldier's story. It's about anyone who tries to move forward without listening to what repeats inside. It's about the impact of not stopping, the invisible cost of crossing everything without understanding. It's about a journey that demands another kind of courage, the courage to stay. The signal kept coming, persistent, patient, as if knowing that, eventually, repetition would make sense. And the more tension grew, the clearer it became this wasn't an error to correct but a call to interpret. Something inside him began accepting that ignoring wasn't working, that maybe a different approach was needed. This awareness was still fragile, almost too uncomfortable to sustain for long, but it existed. And when new consciousness begins to emerge, even subtly, it changes the course of experience. The doors stayed closed. The blockage still appeared. The unease still grew. But now there was a different feeling in the air, as if repetition were preparing the ground for something not yet fully revealed. If this emotional escalation connects with something you recognize in your own journey, right below, this makes sense to me. There came a point when insisting started feeling more exhausting than stopping. It wasn't a dramatic decision or a conscious surrender. It was a silent exhaustion. His body no longer responded the same way to internal commands, and his mind, used to winning through effort, realized something different was being asked. For the first time since returning, he didn't immediately turn the doorknob. He just stood there, before the closed door. The silence that formed in that instant was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was dense, a silence containing layers, memories, sensations accumulated over an entire journey. Without realizing it, he let his shoulders relax. His breathing slowed. There was no urgency, no mission, no one watching. Just him and that boundary that, for some reason, always triggered resistance. Now I want to go even deeper into this, Because this moment of pause marks an invisible but powerful turning point. When someone trained to fight chooses to listen, something essential begins reorganizing inside. The combat mindset gives way to a posture of presence, and presence changes everything. As he remained there without forcing passage, fragmented images began surfacing, not as complete scenes, but as old sensations finally finding space to emerge. The weight of his helmet, distant hurried footsteps, the metallic smell in the air. Emotions pushed backstage during war now found a crack. They didn't come to attack. They came to be recognized. It was in this state of listening that something began making sense. The doors weren't there to be forced through. They represented transitions, never fully lived moments he had to keep moving through. Without processing, decisions made on autopilot, feelings swallowed to ensure survival. Each closed door was a reminder that not everything can be overcome merely by advancing. This realization didn't come as a sudden mystical revelation but as a gradual, almost too intimate understanding to explain in simple words. There was a subtle, profound spiritual meaning. The doors symbolized protective boundaries, invitations to inner care, warnings that certain passages require awareness before movement. The blockage wasn't punishment, it was protection. This perception completely changed how he saw his own experience. His body wasn't failing, it was communicating. The resistance wasn't weakness, it was a request for attention. For the first time, he considered that maybe true courage in that moment was not to cross, but to stay, to feel, to allow what had been postponed to find space. The impact of this understanding was silent but deep. Something inside him relaxed, not because everything was resolved, but because there was finally a different direction. The internal battle lost strength when it was no longer necessary. It wasn't about overcoming an external obstacle anymore, it was about embracing an internal process. This shift in posture opened space for a transformation. That doesn't happen from outside in but the other way around. The spiritual meaning of doors began revealing itself in other life areas too: avoided conversations, interrupted emotions, postponed decisions. Everything seemed connected by the same invisible thread. The journey wasn't just about wars past, but about how he'd learned to deal with limits throughout life, always advancing, always overcoming until the day advancing stopped being possible without consequences. By pausing before the door, he realized there were parts of himself never allowed to exist outside combat mode, tired parts, sensitive parts, parts needing silence, not strategy. This awareness didn't bring immediate relief, but it brought truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, reorganizes the journey. From that moment on, each door was observed more closely, not as an enemy, but as a symbol, an invitation to reflection, a reminder that some passages require inner preparation, not external force. This shift in perspective didn't eliminate the blockage but changed his relationship to it. And that makes all the difference. The story doesn't end here. In fact, it's from this listening that other revelations begin emerging, bringing up old decisions, unresolved impacts, and a transformation still in process. The soldier still had much to understand about himself, about the war that ended, and about the battles that continued in other forms. If this moment of pause and spiritual discovery resonates with your own journey, write below, "I'm on this journey too." After that moment of pause, something kept moving inside even when he wasn't facing a specific door. The understanding didn't come all at once. It came in layers, as if uncovering meaning hidden behind meaning. Gradually, it became clear the doors were never the real problem. They only revealed something already there, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because this discovery completely changes the logic of the experience. When he stopped interpreting the blockage as failure, something essential reorganized. Doors came to represent internal boundaries crossed too soon, pains that never had space to exist, parts of the soul that returned from war wounded and silent. They weren't obstacles placed to block his path, they were signs of protection, asking for care. This revelation brought an impact unlike any he'd felt before. There wasn't immediate relief, but there was coherence. For the first time, everything started making sense within the same narrative. War demanded quick, often irreversible decisions. It demanded emotions be suspended for survival. It demanded sensitivity be sidelined. And he did exactly what needed to be done. But the cost remained stored backstage. Doors appeared precisely when his body sensed no external threat, when constant vigilance was no longer needed, when the environment allowed him to lower his guard. It was in this space of apparent safety that unaddressed pains found openings to manifest. The signal didn't say, "Stop because you can't." It said, "Stop because you need to." This shift in interpretation profoundly altered his mindset toward his own process. Instead of fighting the blockage, he began observing it. Instead of demanding quick answers, he allowed questions to remain. That internal decision, though simple, marked the start of real transformation. Because every true transformation begins when someone accepts. They don't need to rush their own understanding. He noticed his body reacted similarly in other situations, not just before physical doors, but before difficult conversations, choices requiring vulnerability, moments when he needed to allow himself to feel beyond functionality. It was as if the signal said, "There's an internal passage here that hasn't yet been crossed with awareness." The hidden truth behind the experience was delicate. It wasn't about reliving pain but recognizing it. It wasn't about returning to war but allowing what was lived to find a legitimate place in his story. Doors symbolized that threshold between what was endured and what still needed integration. A sacred space of transition that accepts presence, not force. This understanding also brought a self-compassion he'd never cultivated before. Used to demanding performance, he began respecting limits. Used to advancing, he learned to remain. Used to silencing emotions, he began listening without judgment. The signal stopped being an enemy and became a silent ally, guiding more conscious decisions. Curiously, the more he accepted the spiritual meaning of doors, the less threatening they became. The blockage didn't vanish immediately but lost its conflictual charge. He could stand there, breathe, notice what arose, and then decide more clearly whether it was time to cross or wait. This conscious choice returned to him something war had fragmented: internal autonomy. Unfaced pains began manifesting in subtle but understandable ways, not as attacks, but as memories asking for embrace. Not as crises, but as emotions finally finding space to exist. His body, once seen as an obstacle, became recognized as a faithful messenger, a guardian of boundaries crossed. When there was no other option, this new reading of the experience revealed something even deeper. Protection doesn't always appear as comfort. Sometimes it shows up as resistance, as delay, as discomfort. Because protecting also means preventing someone from advancing unprepared for what comes next. The closed doors were preventing him from crossing his own story without integrating what remained behind. This awareness didn't bring an end but a different beginning. The journey stopped being about eliminating symptoms and became about understanding meanings. Decisions started being made with greater presence. Rigid mindset gave way to a more flexible, more human posture. The impact spread beyond that simple act of pausing before a door. There was still much to be revealed, many layers to touch with care, many parts of the soul to embrace without haste. The signal remained not as a threat, but as a guide. And as he allowed himself to listen, new understandings began forming, opening paths to deeper integration of all he'd lived. If this reading about protection and internal boundaries touches something in your own experience, comment below. This makes sense to me. From this understanding, something begins reorganizing inside quietly, almost imperceptibly to outsiders, but deeply impactful to the one living it. The soldier no longer moves with the same rigidity. There's a shift in mindset, a new way of seeing his journey. He understands resisting all the time isn't synonymous with strength, and that some decisions require pause, listening, and honesty with oneself. For the first time, he respects his own processes without rushing to prove anything to anyone. What once was mere survival begins transforming into care. This inner transformation doesn't happen like a magical flash or grand revelation. It's born backstage in details, in small daily choices. Accepting help, for example, stops being a sign of weakness and becomes an act of courage. Acknowledging his own pains is no longer seen as defeat, but as a necessary step toward healing. There's a hidden truth he begins accessing. No one crosses war without scars, and ignoring them only deepens their silent impact over time. Doors that once seemed impassable are now observed with different eyes. He understands he doesn't need to break them all down at once. Some must be opened gently, Others may need to stay closed for now, and that's okay. This shift in perspective completely changes how he walks. The journey stops being a sequence of confrontations and becomes a process of reconstruction. Each step is taken with more awareness, more presence, more respect for his own limits. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because this is exactly where many people get lost. There's silent pressure to move forward at all costs, to not look back, to not feel. But what almost no one reveals is that ignoring what's trapped inside exacts a high price later. The soldier begins realizing true strength lies in sustaining the process, not accelerating the outcome. He learns to listen to body, mind, and heart. He learns some pains don't want to be fought, they want to be embraced. This new posture creates a curious effect. The doors begin to change, not because the external world suddenly transformed, but because his gaze is no longer the same. What once seemed an absolute blockage now appears as an invitation to self-knowledge. There's a sense of advancement, not at the ego's pace, but at the pace of truth. Each door that opens reveals something about who he is, who he became after everything he lived, and who he can still become. With time, he realizes healing isn't linear. There are days of clarity and days of confusion. There are advances and setbacks. But unlike before, this no longer paralyzes him. He understands it's part of the journey. This acceptance changes everything. It changes decisions, reactions, even silence. The impact of this transformation spills into other life areas, creating space for new possibilities, new meanings, new inner revelations. Doors stop being enemies. They become signs. Some indicate rest, others preparation. Still others show that certain battles no longer need to be fought. The soldier learns that moving forward doesn't always mean physical advancement. Sometimes it means staying, feeling, reorganizing. And it's at this point that something greater begins, aligning within him, preparing the ground for even deeper understandings that go beyond pain and touch the hidden purpose in all of it. If this passage resonates with something you're also living, comment below. I'm in process. There's a message that runs through this story and reaches those who listen, even if they don't realize it immediately. Because at its core, it's not just about a soldier facing closed doors, but about something that repeats in many people's lives in different phases, under different names, but with the same silent impact. How many doors have appeared on your path as unexpected limits? How many times has something locked up just when you thought you were ready to move forward? There's a hidden truth in these moments that almost no one teaches us to see from early on. We're trained to believe blockage is failure, pause is delay, and resistance is the only possible response. But the real journey shows something else. It shows that some interruptions carry an inner call, an opportunity for transformation that only appears when everything slows down. The soldier realizes this when he starts connecting the dots of his own story. Each closed door reveals an emotional backstage, a decision not taken, a pain ignored, a part of himself that asked for attention and was silenced by survival's noise. This connection with the viewer happens because, on some level, everyone has stood before something that wouldn't open, a relationship that stalled, a project that froze, a dream that seemed distant, and almost always, the first reaction was to force, insist, fight harder. Few stop to ask what that limit is trying to protect, because sometimes the blockage isn't weakness, it's protection. Protection against repeating patterns, against losing oneself, against advancing without internal structure to sustain what comes next. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because here the message becomes universal. When the soldier understands doors speak more about his inner world than his external path, something shifts in how he sees himself. He starts observing signs with more maturity, reflecting before reacting, recognizing that some battles don't ask for strength, they ask for awareness. This mindset shift redefines decisions, reprioritizes values, and completely changes his relationship with time. How often does life ask for silence, and we respond with noise? How often does the body ask for rest, and the mind insists on running? There's a profound impact when someone finally realizes looking inward isn't retreating, it's preparing the ground. The soldier begins understanding each closed door carries a question, and ignoring that question creates repetition. Facing it, on the other hand, brings revelations about limits, old wounds, fears disguised as courage. This message doesn't accuse, judge, or point fingers. It invites. It invites honest pause, true listening, reconnection with what was left behind in the rush to move forward. Because the journey isn't a straight line. It's made of cycles, returns, inner revisions that shape who a person becomes along the way. And every time someone ignores these signs, life finds another way to present the same lesson, usually with greater intensity. The soldier realizes respecting his own limits doesn't make him smaller, it makes him whole. Acknowledging vulnerabilities doesn't weaken him, it makes him clearer. And it's at this point that the viewer begins seeing themselves in the story, even without ever wearing a uniform. Because everyone carries invisible battles, unspoken pains, postponed decisions. Everyone, at some point, has stood before a door that wouldn't open and didn't understand why. The echoing message is simple but deep. Not everything that stalls is delay. Not everything that hurts is punishment. Some experiences are invitations to adjust course, strengthen foundations, and align the inner self before moving on. When this is understood, perspective shifts, posture shifts, and the journey finds a new rhythm. And this understanding begins preparing the ground for something even deeper, connected to purpose, identity, and choices beyond the visible. If this reflection touched something inside you, comment, "This makes sense to me." Something keeps echoing after all this, almost like a whisper that won't quiet. Not every sign comes with noise. Not every spiritual message arrives as an immediate shock. Often, it repeats. And it's precisely in repetition that the deepest impact resides. The soldier realizes that had he kept ignoring it, those doors would have kept appearing in different scenarios with the same invisible function. Because what isn't heard returns. What isn't cared for insists. This is one of the most uncomfortable hidden truths of the human journey. When someone understands this, something begins reorganizing inside. Mindset shifts, decisions become less impulsive, urgency loses strength. It's no longer about winning the next external battle, but about aligning what's outside with what's within. The soldier begins realizing true transformation doesn't happen in confrontation, but in the moment he accepts looking at what he's always avoided. It's there, in that silent space, that real impact forms. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a point where the story stops being merely symbolic and starts directly touching the listener's life. How many signs have repeated in your path? How many different situations brought the same sensation, the same discomfort, the same disguised invitation as obstacle? None of this is random. There's a backstage pattern guided by unresolved experiences and soul parts still asking for attention. The soldier understands. The world didn't close against him. Something within him needed care before advancing. And that perception changes everything. Because when someone recognizes this, they stop treating themselves as an enemy. They stop demanding machine-like performance. They stop confusing resistance with strength. The journey becomes more conscious, more honest, more aligned with who they truly are. Doors that once symbolized frustration now become milestones of learning. This is the part of the story that connects most deeply with listeners, because almost no one speaks openly about it. We live in a culture that values constant advancement, but ignores its emotional cost. Yet the body feels, the mind accumulates, the soul signals. And when these signs aren't respected, they manifest as blockages, repetitions, and discomforts that seem to lack logical explanation. But they do have explanations, just not simple ones. The soldier comes to understand that listening to these signs isn't giving up, it's maturing. That stopping doesn't mean failing, it means recalibrating. That accepting help doesn't diminish anyone, it expands possibilities for healing. The shift in posture creates space for something new, something born not from force, but from awareness. And it's here the story gains different depth, because it doesn't promise quick fixes, but offers clarity. And clarity changes destinies. The deeper this understanding goes, the clearer it becomes that some spiritual signs don't come to frighten but to protect. They appear as subtle alerts, as repeated invitations, as doors that won't yield until something internal is ready. Ignoring this means walking in circles. Listening means beginning a truer crossing, even if slower. And that crossing redefines everything: relationships, choices, priorities, even self-image. The soldier's story doesn't end here because this kind of transformation doesn't happen all at once. It keeps revealing itself in layers, new tests, new understandings. Each step taken with greater awareness opens space for further revelations, questions, answers that don't fit the surface. It's as if, by respecting the signs, he's finally ready to cross not just one door but a much deeper internal boundary. If this reflection resonated with you, write below, "I'm on this journey too." If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story walked alongside you. And when this kind of content makes sense, when it helps you see signs, choices, and processes more clearly, it's worth staying close. Subscribing to the channel is a simple way to keep walking this path, to access reflections that deepen, provoke, and respect each person's timing. If this connection happened now, leave a signal in the comments. Write something like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you till the end," because that creates real exchange between those on either side of the screen. And if at any moment you felt this story touched something personal, a like helps strengthen this silent conversation we've built here. There's a video right here on the side that connects directly with everything we've discussed. It deepens this reflection even further and continues in exactly the same vibration. Click it and keep going with me there.